So first, how can we create community and foster engagement in online classes? That's really what we're going to be answering today. Let's see, for today's agenda is the importance of community is what we're going to discuss first. Why is it important in online classes and in classes in general? Second is community building principles. We're going to go over several principles and how to incorporate those into your class. Then we're going to go over digital tools, and I'm not going to show you all of them, but I'll go over a list of tools that you might find interesting and useful for your courses, and then we'll wrap it up with some resources and references for you to go get some more information. All right, so why is community important? So everyone jump on the chat and give me a few things or a few reasons why you think community is important in courses. I'll give you a few minutes to type something out. We are social creatures, Violet, yes. Yes, it's actually true. Learning is actually better when it's in a group rather than just absorbing it naturally from the educator. And yes, so Natasha, yes, so students feel like they belong. Absolutely. If they feel like they belong, they're going to do much better in the course. So true. Yes, and building a network. We know in graduate school how important this is, but it's also important in undergraduate classrooms because they already need to start networking at that time as well. Absolutely. Yes, students participate more when they feel safe. Absolutely. And yes, David, actually, it gives everyone the opportunity to feel heard, which is really important in classes. So, okay, everyone, thanks for sending in your chats, and I'll go ahead and show you what the research shows. So first, community is important for attendance. You will actually have more students attend your classes more frequently if you have a feeling of community in the class. The second is retention. So students are more likely to stay in the class, they're more likely to stay in their program, and they're more likely to stay in the university or the college that you're teaching at as a whole. If they don't feel like they belong, if they don't feel like they have that community, the retention really goes down. Second is interest. So if they feel like there's a community that they belong to, they will actually be more interested in the topic, whether they were in the first place or not. So even if they are taking a class that they weren't originally interested in, if they feel like they belong, they really will have more interest naturally. And fourth, overall performance is just better in a community. So if they feel like they belong, they're going to perform better. And this has been shown over and over in the research. So these four points are definitely shown in research. Plus, right now we have an extra little point that we should talk about as well. We're currently in a global pandemic. So that being the case, we might have a lot of students that are feeling isolated for a variety of reasons. And so just on a human to human level, having a bit of community is really helpful for students. So we might have international students, for instance, that don't know anyone yet and they haven't had a chance to talk to others, or maybe students that have moved across the country to go to your college that you're teaching at, and now they can't go, out and be social in the same way. So it's also mindful in the current situation that community is even more important. So I wanted to also talk about Larson. So Larson did a study in 2015, and that there are several factors that show students you care. And this caring is how you build community, or it's a part of how you build community. So first is getting to know your students' names. That might be really easy right now, as if you're doing a Zoom call, everyone's name is up on the screen, but still, just knowing who they are helps. And this was done in 2015, not necessarily about online classes, but just classes in general. Also, displaying concerns. So if your students, have concerns about the class, if something's going on and they start missing class or not turning in assignments, just check in with them. Show that you're actually there and that you care, and that will really show them that you are interested in their success as students. Make an effort to get to know the students. I can't emphasize this enough. Beyond just their names, like really getting to know who they are as people really makes a difference in students' lives. They're not just here to get an education from you. They're also looking for mentorship. They're looking for people to look up to, and that is a good way to do that or start that process. Create interesting and applicable lessons. So we won't talk about that much today, but also making it relevant to their lives is super important. And finally, just addressing students' concerns. So if they have concerns or questions about the class, particularly in this day and age of what's going on, your students might have several different issues going on, and just being able to show that you are concerned about their issues and that you care will really help build that community. All right, so next I'm going to jump into how we can actually implement all the stuff I just told you research says we should be doing. So here are the principles we're going to be using today. So first, the first community building principle is share who you are. The second is use community building activities. And then the third is set clear community expectations. And I'm going to go into all these in detail, but I just wanted to let you know what's coming up. So show who you are. So first off, introduce yourself to your class. In online classes, it's a little bit different because you know that first day of school feeling is just a little bit different in online classes. So there's several ways for you to introduce yourself, depending on whether if you're in an asynchronous or a synchronous class. So just to clarify, an asynchronous class means that you are not meeting with your students at a particular time each week on video screen. And then the synchronous class means you are. So it's like a regular class, but it's just being held on Zoom or some other conference software each week. So introduce yourself in an asynchronous class, or both, and asynchronous and synchronous class, I would be sure to introduce yourself using a video for sure. Say who you are, say a bit about yourself, and do that as well if you have a live Zoom session too. So second is be real with your students. This is hard sometimes for a lot of new faculty, but really be yourself. They want to know your personality. If they wanted just like, if they didn't want to get to know you as a faculty member, they would take a 3,000 person course on, what are some of those things like Coursera or something like that, where they have those massive classes where they're really not getting to know their students. But this is part of the reason they're paying to come to your school or your university. Third is talk to your students. So it's hard online, but really make sure that you're spending time before and after classes talking to them. In an asynchronous class where you don't have that class time, you can still do that. It's just going to look a little bit different. And then finally, this is one that some people find funny, but get off the ivory tower. This is something I actually had trouble with as I started teaching, was that I was so concerned that my students wouldn't think I knew what I was talking about, or that I needed to keep my authority, that I often didn't come down to their level and in a way that allowed me to build genuine relationships with them. So your student, you're the faculty member, you're the educator in the classroom, you're automatically going to have authority. So don't let that get in the way of forming real relationships and being real with your students. You need to share personal information, not like super personal information, but some personal information. What are your hobbies? Do you have pets? What was your educational experience like? Did you have some problems or some challenges in your education? Just get to know them and let them get to know you. So that's the first principle. Second, I'm going to talk about community building activities. So first off, community building activities are just activities that you can use to make sure that everyone gets to know each other in the class, everyone feels safe, and these activities can be done throughout the semester. I think a lot of people, sometimes some of these activities could be referred to as icebreakers, but I think these activities really should be done throughout the semester, especially in online courses, as it's really harder to build community online. So you need to do these kind of activities more frequently throughout the semester. And I would even suggest, if you're meeting not face-to-face, but in a Zoom class each time, that you do these each week. So if you're meeting once or twice a week, I would say do one of these types of activities. Which ones? So have a few ready. I'm going to give you a whole list of activities, but have a few ready and just pick what fits the students in your class. So what might work for one class might not work for another. And then finally, make sure that your activities that you're picking are safe and inclusive. So allow students time to opt out if they don't want to do an activity. Students are stressed enough as it is right now. We don't need to add additional stress by making them do an activity that isn't necessary for a grade, and just let them choose not to do it if they don't want to. Also give students time to think. One of the standard things I see is like, say something interesting about yourself. It takes me a few minutes to figure out what the interesting fact is, and so your students need that time too. So sometimes you might throw an activity out there and say, okay, we're going to take a 2-minute break and then we'll come back and do this, right? Give them a little time to think. Also, lost in the crowd tactic. Don't single someone out, especially if they're really not participating for some reason. They might have had a rough day. Something might be going on. So don't really call them out or something like that. I would reach out afterwards, but try not to spotlight your students. And then finally, make sure it's a low-stake activity, especially at the start of class. Don't tie this in with a grade. This is really supposed to be a low-stress, fun type of thing where they can really connect with the others in the class. And so we want to make sure that that's at the level it's at. And then lastly, also think about if your activity will exclude anyone, for instance. For instance, if you have someone with a visual impairment, think about, is it an activity they can do? Those kind of things you need to take into consideration. Okay, so next up, I'm going to talk about some activities you can actually do. So this is one of the most important things I think you can do for your students at the start of the class. And I'm a huge advocate of this. And this is the student welcome surveys. These go by a lot of different names, but at the start of class, I would have one of their assignments, not for grade necessarily, but one of the things that they should do is just simply fill out a survey so that you can get to know them better. And this survey should just be between you and them. It shouldn't be something that all the students can see necessarily. So what should go on this student welcome survey? So first, what name do they go by? So this is really important because you want to get that pronunciation right. They also might be going by a different name that's actually on the roster for a variety of reasons. You might have a transgender student that's using a different name. You might have an international student that prefers to go by a different name, or someone that just doesn't, might go by their middle name instead of by their first name. And if you know their names, you're going to build that community with them. Second is pronouns. Again, transgender students might have different pronouns than you would standardly expect from looking at them, or just in general. So do ask what people's pronouns are as well. Accommodations. This is a great place to ask if a student has an accommodation or they feel like they should, and then you can point them into that direction later after you get these surveys back. Questions related to the subject. So what questions you might have for your particular subject that you want to know about students? I don't know, if you're teaching a writing class that's on a 300 level, ask them what kind of writing they like to do or something like that. Sometimes it's a fun fact where they are in their college experience. So are they a freshman or are they all seniors? That might really impact how you teach the class. I had an interesting story once. I had 4 swimmers in my classroom, and it was really interesting to see that in their surveys, so that I could see that they were immediately already a small cohort in the classroom. And also I knew that then they were going to have some times that they weren't going to be in class, and I knew to expect that. So that was a great thing to know about the students. Finally, you can ask questions like, how can I help you succeed in this class? And is there anything you think that I should know about? So this is also one of the really vital questions I think that's important, is give your students a confidential space and permission to kind of let you know where they're at right now. So students might not write anything, but sometimes a student might say, hey, look, my mom is sick right now. I'm in an apartment with several other people, and so this class might be difficult. it's important to realize that a lot of students, online learning might not be their preference. They would much rather be in a class with a controlled environment, but right now that's just not possible. So really getting to know what they need is going to help you build that community rapport with them, and also just in general help you build your class going forward for the semester. So let's do another little quick chat. So what questions do you think you should put in a student welcome survey that you would like to know about your students? We'll just see what everyone thinks and see if we can't maybe steal some ideas from each other. Maybe someone has actually done this in their class. So you can use chat, or you can unmute yourself and call out just what kind of questions would you like to see on a student welcome survey for your class. Do they have a job? Yeah, that's an important one. If they have a ton of responsibilities outside of the class, that could be something important to know. And I mean, yeah, what are they wanting to gain by the end of class? Absolutely. You might find that you have, half your class wants something in particular out of the course that you actually weren't prepared for. And that would actually be a really important thing to show the class if they, if you say, half the class is looking for this and I didn't put my syllabus, and you know what? I'm going to go ahead and include it because so many of you want to see it. That would really show that you care about the students. What's your ideal day? What are you taking? Why are you taking this class? So absolutely, I think those are fun things. I'd love to do the ideal day, probably not in a pandemic question. Do they have kids? I don't know if I would ask if they have kids or not. That might be too personal. I don't know, they might want to tell you as well. Yeah. How many units or courses have they enrolled in? Absolutely. So if they're enrolled in a ton of other courses, this is something especially important for online classes, synchronous online classes, especially. Zoom fatigue is a real thing. So if they are staring at a screen for 3 hours before they come to your 3-hour class, you need to know, because they might need to turn off their video for a little bit. They might need to take an extra break. So it's really good to know. So awesome. All right. And so what is your current, I didn't see this one, Natasha's, what's your current career level? Yeah, that's a great one, especially depending on what field you're asking. That could really be important. You might have a lot of working professionals that already are decently involved in the material you might be producing. And then, have they taken online classes before? David, I didn't even think of this question. So important. Yes, well, maybe some students have taken like the half online kind of emergency situation online classes, but it's very different than taking a fully online start to finish class. And so if you find a lot of your students haven't taken online classes before, you might even on the first day just run through some very basics with them, show them the LMS, maybe even if they have taken online courses before, but show them the LMS, show them how Zoom works, give them some tips because they might not have done this before. Absolutely. So, all right, still have a lot to cover, so I'm going to keep going. But thank you all for working with me on that. I love to get input from what everyone else has done because I know a lot of people have already started teaching and stuff. So, all right. So these activities that I'm going to talk about are primarily for synchronous classes, but you can kind of alter them for an asynchronous class as well. So the first thing, this is one that I really think is great to start off a whole course with, is use breakout rooms and then put people in teams and have them work on an interesting problem or puzzle. It can be related to class, but it doesn't have to be. This is a really great way for a group to kind of focus on an activity without having to focus on themselves immediately as soon as they get into a classroom. And then they can get to know the people in their group really well, or at least pretty quickly. So giving them some kind of interesting problem or puzzle that can be kind of fun is a great activity to just let them know at least 3 or 4 other people in the class. Another one, this is more of an icebreaker, but I still think it's a fun one. It can really bring some laughs into the classroom and let you see some different personalities. So put them in breakout rooms and have the groups decide which 3 items they're going to bring to a desert island. I've done some variations on this. So like maybe it's they have to escape the desert island. What 3 things are they going to bring, but they can't bring a boat, or like something more fun or as fun as like, you're going to be stuck together. So what 3 things are you going to do for entertainment? Those can be kind of interesting, and they have to negotiate with each other, especially if there's more than 3 people in the group. So that can be fun to see and get to know each other a little bit. This goals activity is actually one that you could use all the time. I wouldn't use it constantly because it could get boring, but this is a good one to either start a class with or wrap up a class with. And so like, what's a big or small goal you are currently working toward, and how is it going? And this, again, doesn't have to be related to school. Maybe in a pandemic, they're learning how to paint. And so they're having a Bob Ross party every night, and, you just want to know how it's going. Maybe they're going to show you their painting, which would be really cool. I'd be excited to see that. I'm not a painter or much of an artist, so I would be really excited to see what other people are doing. And the next one is pretty similar, but I think this is a good one, especially for, again, being in a pandemic. It's good to find some positive things, especially at the start or end of a class session, and say, what was a big or small success for you today or this week? Kind of give students a way to do shout outs. Sometimes we have students that might be doing amazing things, and there's never a chance for them to really like get in there and tell us about it. So you might find out some really cool things about your students that you never thought of to ask. So this is a great one to do as well. Okay, so now let's do a few activities for asynchronous classes. This is a little bit tougher in my opinion, but they can be just, it's harder to set up, but let me clarify. It's harder to set up sometimes, but they can be just as fun and it's exciting. And sometimes it's better because if students miss a class, then they can still go and see it if you're using, so you can still use these in a synchronous class. But they are especially used for asynchronous classes. Okay, so set up teams. So your class might not have a group project or something in it, but that doesn't mean you can't have student groups, small student groups. So especially in your LMS, you can create a small group of students that can help each other with their writing, they can help each other with the research, or they can just share notes with each other. They don't have to necessarily be a group project that they're focusing on. They can really just be like, here's going to be your small group, and really like use that. You can use that in several creative ways to have them really rely on each other a bit more. So like they can ask this group questions rather than having to go to you if they're uncomfortable with that, or the whole class. Next one is discussions, online discussions about themselves or the news. So I have a little bit to say about this one. You see online how a lot of people are like, make one discussion post and reply to 2 of your colleagues. So that can be a good way to do a discussion, but I think sometimes it just feels like busy work for the student. They don't really get it, So there are some other ways to do discussions though that I think are really great. And maybe a little bit better. So one way to do it is to start with 2 discussions. And so you turn the first one on and say, okay, everyone replied to this question, and you just have to reply, and you turn it on to where they can't see anyone's post yet. So everyone replies to the question, and then after they reply, they get to see everyone's question. Then turn on the second discussion and say, okay, now that everyone has replied to that first one, in that second discussion, go back, read everyone's replies, and then pick 2 people's reply and, incorporate them into your next reply to the topic. So that way they have to go through and read everyone's, they get a little deeper into the material. You can also have them go back and say, what themes did you see from everyone's post? What themes did you see that really resonated with you, and explain it a bit more? So that way it's a little deeper into the discussion rather than just something they might consider a busy work. And, they might have, 3 classes that they're doing a post and 2 replies on. So it just breaks it up a little bit more too. And again, discussions don't have to be about the class all the time. So I like to have a discussion about what news have you seen that, is related to our topic for the week or our topic for this class. I think bringing news into whatever field you're doing is so important. You know, if it's psychology and you're doing statistics, you could talk about, okay, how did this news article actually portray the statistics of the researcher? Like, you know, you see those articles about like drinking wine is just as good as exercising for 30 minutes. And you can be like, what did this news article actually do that wasn't quite what the researcher had in mind? So you can go look at that. Or for instance, if you're teaching religious studies, there's a lot of religious news coming out right now. So you can talk about that in your classes. So anyway, that's a lot on asynchronous discussions, but okay, intro videos. So have students upload a video or an audio clip introducing themselves, and then consider some prompts for them to pick from. So for instance, I wouldn't say that this is something that you should grade. I don't think this is even something that you say students must do. This could just be something that's, you know, ungraded and optional. You might have students that aren't in a good location to film a video, and so you don't want to make them super stressed out trying to create a video, but maybe they can do an audio instead, you know, just introducing themselves, saying who they are. So this is a good one, but make sure that you aren't stressing students out with it. Next one, discussion and coffee hours. Discussion or coffee hours. So everyone really has to have office hours usually for courses, but I think we don't talk about them in ways that really invite community building in as they should. So if we really say we have optional office hours, but instead frame it as times for general chats and class questions, you know, call them coffee hours or, you know, something like that, discussion hours. I think it'll get students a lot more involved. Students a lot of times are looking for mentorship. They have questions beyond just your subject that you're teaching them, and it's really great for them to get to come and say, hey, you know, I'm thinking about going to grad school. How do I do that? What was your experience like? And really inviting them in and letting them know that that's okay is really important, especially from the start of class. And I would also suggest that you break it up and have both video time and just regular chat. So what I mean by that is, like, you know, having a Zoom chat hour, but then you could also have an hour where you're going to use maybe the chat function in your LMS where they can just type it out instead, because you might have students that either have a poor internet connection or that really just don't have the technology necessary where they can chat, but they really just can't video chat in the same way. That gives students some options. They might just have a quick question, and, you know, they might not want to get all dressed and get on camera just to ask you one question. So that's an option as well. Let me see. So let's do one more. Actually, let me just ask, does anyone have any questions about this? I've covered a lot so far in 30 minutes. So any questions about what I've covered or comments about what you've seen? You can use the chat, or you can unmute yourself and speak up if you prefer. Oh, okay, that's an old one.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
Shelby. Hi, it's Natasha. I was just having a question about, I think, was it for synchronous? I just want to clarify for a couple of things that you said might be good to start or wrap up a class with. Are you saying like every week we can ask them like the same question, like what is one big or small goal you're working toward, or one big success, small success that happened for you this week? So every week we would do that, like sort of like consistently, like the same one. So is that?
You know, I would probably vary it because they might not have successes every single week. So I might ask, I mean, I do think you should have some kind of community building activity every week. So like at the beginning or end of class. But I might not ask the same question each time, just so that it's still interesting to students. There's a lot of questions like this that you could ask. So you could do successes, you could do, I can't think of anything coming to my mind right now, but you could look online for some like team building questions like that. So I think did that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Of course. Anything else? Anyone have any other question or comments on anything we've covered so far?
It's Catherine. Um, Back to your point about the online discussions and the discussion boards, because I had done that last semester, and I noticed that there was a distinct pattern when they were responding to other students, and they were like their sentence structures and the things they were saying. And I thought, what are they, how are they, what's going on? And I Googled it, and I found that there's like a how to sound like you're really engaged in another person's post when you really don't care. And they were kind of all following that same pattern. I was like, okay, so clearly I have to change up the way I'm asking them to respond to people, because they were all doing the same. It was kind of like, use these keywords, use this phrasing, copy, paste, add this. And I was like, oh my God, that's what they're doing, because they all kind of sounded the same. I thought, what's going on here? So yeah, I think, to your point, we have to structure it in a way that makes them think about it in a different way, so that they're not just doing busy work and responding in a way that a teacher's going to go, great, check, here's your points. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's a great point. And it doesn't always have to be the same kind of thing. You could have them make a meme, post your memes, or you could have a question or a comment and say, make some memes out of this, and students can come up with some funny stuff. And that's a bit more creative than even if they just go find one that's already been made, could be funny. But yeah, I think that's a great point, Catherine, that, they might be having to do, if they have 3 or 4 classes, how many discussion posts might they be having to do? And then it becomes just busy work. There's a formula they plug in, and then there they go. So good point.
Shelby, I just have to say I'm really excited about the discussion coffee hours. The student engagement team is here because we are engaging with students virtually for CGU. So how can we do that effectively and build community, especially knowing students being on Zoom all day long? And one thing we've talked about were drop-in hours, where a student can just really get connected to us and additional resources on campus. So it's nice to see that. That's definitely something that we were talking about doing. So
how to do the coffee hours and stuff? That's a good question. So usually I would suggest maybe having a few things already in mind just to start off a chat with the student. Like, don't dive in, just like if you walk up to someone to have a regular discussion, you don't, just blurt out the very deep question that you're going to ask them from the start, but maybe check in with them saying like, hey, how's it going? Things like that, to really check in with them on a almost superficial level in a way, just some small talk. But also I think if you have a theme for the coffee hour, sometimes that can be really great. If you say like, hey, we're gonna have our office hours or discussion hours, and the topic might be something kind of random sometimes, but it might be, we're gonna, if no one has any questions, we'll just be chatting about how to write a good paper, because that's something that might be coming up. Or you could say, we're gonna talk about how to do good presentations. Or since you're working with graduate students, you might say like, how to talk to your professors, and not make it a webinar kind of like this style, but just a discussion, and have them talk about what they've experienced in the past, and have everyone kind of share in a more round robin way. Definitely show everyone how to put everyone on their screens in the coffee hour, rather than just, the presenter view where I might be big on your screen right now, where the slides might be big, just to make it feel more social and more like a team. Anyone else want to jump in and answer that question as well?
Well, I don't have an answer, but I think something I heard in one of our last webinars, or maybe it was something I heard on the radio, but I remember hearing something about kind of meeting the students, or at least being embedded with the students, even if they're in the room. So you kind of put the image, you mentioned something, Shelby, where you put the image in my head where it's like the student don't have to put on their clothes or whatever. So I just imagine them being in their pajamas, but you're also sending them some kind of message or some kind of like a reminder that has to relate it relates with the class in some way. So something that came in my head was like, I don't know, like what's a good way, or, you know, when you're having these kind of discussion sessions, like how is it where it's like that, it's an embedded part of the class, but not really, you don't feel like, okay, this is the class, you know what I mean? Like, how do you ask a question where it's like, oh, what do you think about this poem as it relates to this thing? Is that, I don't know. I don't know where I was going with it.
You know, I think that kind of comes naturally when you have a bit more community. You just start talking, right? So like, I'm not sure I know the answer to your question.
Yeah, it wasn't really a good framed question. So I was...
But I think it just kind of comes up naturally. You know, you can just kind of ask them small questions like, you know, Shamini has an interesting background right now. And I could be like, oh, Shamini, what's that background? And you can kind of get started chatting there. And then you can flow more naturally into a natural discussion. So think about how it would happen in a classroom or like in an office. Like, what would you normally do? You know, just come in and you might see a picture on the wall and chat to them to try and just open up that discussion a little bit. I think those are good ways to do it. I think remembering that, like, we're still people, even though it's online and it's a little awkward, just try and reach out and connect with them about something. And that's why sometimes those opening surveys can be really good, because you might have to, I mean, don't share if it's personal, but like, oh, how's your dog? You know, I remember that from your survey. Or, you know, hey, I guess teams aren't really as much of it. I was going to say, how was your swim meet? But I guess that's not happening. But, you know, have you gone on any good hikes recently? So that could be a good thing. Or ask them, you know, have you seen any good shows recently? Have you, you know, those kind of things can be good to at least get started. Okay, well, I still have some content, so we should keep going and we'll come back to this kind of questions in a little bit. So the third piece of the principles that we were talking about today is setting clear community expectations. And I can't get across to you how important these are to build community. And I know some people might think that's weird, but expectations help with community. They really, truly do. Of course, I am a kind of like, I want to know what the rules are so I don't break them kind of person for multiple reasons. But setting clear expectations are so important. So first, clarify your expectations with your students. Don't make them guess what your thoughts are. And I'll get into some of the expectations I'm kind of talking about, but don't make them guess. Expectations make students feel safe. Like if they know what to expect, or if they know what you're expecting from them, they usually will raise to meet those expectations if you make them clear. And then have reminders for whatever they are throughout the semester. Students forget. 16 weeks is a long time. So bring those back, even if it's just like a slide at the beginning of your presentation or in your announcements. So what are some of the expectations I'm talking about? So first, what are your Zoom expectations? Zoom is hard. Let students turn off their video and use chat instead sometimes. Sometimes people are in their car, for instance, and you know, because they just need to get out of the house. Maybe they need to, I've had my dogs start barking in a meeting and I just need to turn off my video and go take care of that for a minute during the meeting. Your students are still people, they're living at home. This isn't an ideal situation. So, you know, I can give you suggestions, but whatever your Zoom expectations are, let the students know what they are. So I would also suggest giving students regular breaks. Let them know that they're going to have a break at the top of the hour each time. That'll help them be like, okay, I can wait another 5 minutes so you have less interruptions. Give time before and after for general conversation. I think this is really important about community as well. You know, think about a normal classroom again. You're going to come in a few minutes early, hopefully, and you might chat with other students around you really naturally. And afterwards, you can just walk up to the professor and say, hey, you know, what do you think about this or whatever. So it's good, even if your Zoom class is over, make it clear that they can leave, but you're going to stay around for some questions after, and you can just chat. It doesn't even have to be about the class, but just letting them know that like you're here for them and you are even giving them a little extra time because you care about it. So don't just like end it and go. And then again, I keep saying this, but like, this is a tough time. Be nice to your students. And just realize that As educators, we are dealing with a whole person, not just someone we're pouring knowledge into. So I have a few more. So next one, what are your expectations for emails, discussion boards, chat, and other communication? So there's a lot more going on in an online class than in a regular class. So in a regular class, you might have, you know, your computer or a notebook or whatever, but you're really just chatting with, you know, your voice. But now you might have tons of emails. Really, I've heard from a lot of faculty that they're overwhelmed with emails. So maybe you want to set expectations for how often you're going to reply. The same for discussion boards, chat, and other communication. So one of the things to think about is, are you requiring informal or formal language? I've had some faculty members get really upset, and I'm not talking about CGU faculty. I mean, I guess they could, but really upset when they don't have a formal email. And not just like because they're trying to be stringent, but because they're trying to set their students up for success in a business world. And so just let your students know what you're expecting. Show them what you think a formal email should look like. Can they be less formal when they're on discussion boards and chat? You know, that might be more natural for them in their communication style. And it'll take less of their time. So just think about what you should do there, and let your students know what you do expect. Let them know how often, you know, they should be communicating with you. Do you want them to, you know, have a discussion board post every week or whatever? Like, let them know what you expect and how often you're going to respond. You know, one of the things we really like to do is set up a Q&A discussion, and they don't have to reply there, but students can put their questions in there and then crowdsource from other students, because maybe some other students know the answer. And as you know, the educator, I might not have time to respond as quick as some of the other students might. And so it's a really good way to crowdsource some information. And if you do see something incorrect, it's really easy to go and be like, actually, and correct if it's some misinformation. But it's a really good way to have those kind of things go on. Next, what if a student makes a racist, sexist, etc. remark? How do you handle that? So one thing or several things I would suggest: set expectations that those aren't going to be allowed in class. Be really clear about that so everyone feels safe in a class, you know, and that they know that that isn't going to fly in your class. If they do happen, don't ignore the comments. You need to address the comments immediately. How you should do that is going to be different depending on what the situation is exactly. But I would emphasize that you are there as an educator. So don't shame students necessarily. You're there to educate them. I always go in, if there is a remark like that, I'm always thinking, okay, it's based on ignorance, not some other kind of issue. And so they just don't know. To share a personal story, when I first came to California, because I'm from Oklahoma, when I first came to California, I said something that was inappropriate, and I had no clue it was inappropriate, which doesn't excuse it. But thankfully, I had a good friend that was like, hey, that's not cool, here's the reason. And I was like, oh my gosh, sorry, thank you. And sometimes that happens in a classroom. You have students from very different places. So you need to, as an educator, let them know that it's not okay, but don't shame them. But also you can't just let the comments slide either, because this has to be a good place for all of your students. You're really setting them up for the real world. So be sure and do that. So these are just a few expectations that you need to set out, but you really need to let your students know what they can expect. And you can do that in welcome videos. You can do that in your first session of class as well. But I don't have a whole lot of time, so just very quickly, I wanted to go over some of the digital tools that'll help with community. So the first one is, of course, Zoom. Also, Google Slides and Google Docs. These are great if you're going to use a breakout room. I really prefer to use Google Slides with a breakout room, and I'll just assign each group to a Google Slide, because when you have a bunch of people writing on one single Google document, it can bounce around and be kind of confusing. But if you say, okay, this one group is going to be on this one slide, it prevents a lot of bouncing like that. Next thing is Canvas tools. If you have a different LMS, they will probably have these tools, but we've talked about discussions a bit. Canvas has a chat function. So be very clear that if you're going to use the chat function, that you're going to be online to chat at particular times, because you won't get a notification unless you're actually logged in and on the chat. You can also set chat times for student groups. So if you're having group projects or something, they can get in the chat and talk there. Or just a general discussion time, especially in an asynchronous class. That could be something that's really helpful. Students are much more comfortable with chat, I have found, than a lot of the other things, because we're used to using messaging and all that kind of things. Finally is the groups function. Now I have links to how to use these in depth in the resources, but you can set up groups in Canvas so that they can have their own little mini place to have discussion and post files to each other and stuff. And I think this is the same on Blackboard. I've only used Blackboard for one semester, but you can do the same kind of thing with other LMSs. Next is, I'm a big proponent of Poll Everywhere. I really like the immediate feedback you can get from people answering questions. You can also have a Poll Everywhere where people are posting questions and you can answer those immediately. Some of the other fun things you can do, I've seen people like, you can do fun things in class where it's like, just post something good that happened to you out the day and you can just see them all come up. So there's a lot of different ways to use Poll Everywhere. Flipgrid. So Flipgrid, if you haven't heard of it, is something where you can post a 3-minute video and then your students can all post 90-minute videos and responses. So this isn't something I would require students to do because of the video issues. But for instance, you can ask a question or ask students to comment on some part of the class, and they can come in and make a little cute 90-minute video, and they use emojis and everything else in that video, and that can be a really cool way to just get to see your students, and it really does promote engagement, because if you do intro videos, for instance, in Flipgrid, students can always go back and look at a bunch of different ones. It's a really cool thing if you want to take a look at the link in the resources later. 90 seconds. Did I say 90 minutes? Yeah, it's 90 seconds. No, not 90 minutes. Okay. And then Padlet. Padlet is it's kind of like a digital Post-it board, I want to say, where you can do a bunch of different things. So it can happen in real time, kind of like the Google Slides and Google Docs, but you could use it in a lot of cool ways. You could be a place for posting questions and answers. It could be like, hey, go find a meme and post it about this, or go find a video and share the video with everyone. And this can actually integrate into Canvas in a really cool way. So one of the things you could do is have them take a picture and say, go take a picture of your favorite thing in your apartment or your house or whatever, and start a chat in that way. So there are some really cool tools you can use to get students just a little more engaged rather than just a text-based classroom. So, oh yes, reminded myself. So FERPA and technical support. So remember, if you're using tools that aren't supported by your university, you need to make sure that you're providing tech support for your students, because tech support might not. So if your university doesn't have a Flipgrid agreement, your tech support people might not be able to help your students with Flipgrid, for instance. So be prepared to help them with that. And don't put anything in those places that might violate FERPA. Just FYI, you still need to keep FERPA, so don't post anything with grades or anything in there. Keep those definitely in Canvas or in your email. So quick review, just share who you are, be real as an educator, use community building activities, and set clear community expectations. And then I just have a few closing advice for you. Prepare for difficult situations before they happen. Talk to other educators, find out about their situations, and then think, what would you do in this situation? Your answer might not be the same, but I found that there's actually been a couple situations where I heard about from other educators and was like, actually, that's how I would handle it. And then I handled it that way, and it actually was a great way to do it. Reflect. So after each class, after your whole course, what could have been better, what worked great, and what assumptions did I make? This is a really good way to make sure you continuously improve as an educator, because there are no perfect educators or courses. So continue to keep learning new techniques, new technology. I know I still learn new things every day, and I know professors that have been teaching for 50 years that are still learning new things. So don't let yourself ever get to that stale place where you're just plugging and playing things. Here are the resources that I was going to give you. I'll give you the link to these slides, or Jonathan will. And here's just some resources for you. These are all links where you can go and look at how to use these different things and incorporate them into your own courses. Here's the link for the slides and also the Preparing Future Faculty website. We do have a bunch of resources for teaching online if you want to go check those out in a very technical way, like how do I really use my Canvas functions to their full ability. We also offer appointments, webinars like this one. We also have teaching demonstrations if you ever want to come and practice your teaching, and the college teaching certificate, all kinds of things. So do go check us out. And here's the references from the research I was kind of talking about today.